Chapter 6. The Law of Solid Ground. Trust is the foundation of leadership. How important is trust for a leader? It is the most important thing. Trust is the foundation of leadership. It is the glue that holds an organization together. Leaders cannot repeatedly break trust with people and continue to influence them. It just doesn't happen. As a nation, we have seen our trust in leaders go up and down during the last several decades. Watergate certainly took its toll on the American people's confidence in leadership. Trust in President Richard Nixon became so low that he had no choice but to resign. He had lost his ability to influence. Bill Clinton was a remarkably gifted leader, but questions of trust undermined his leadership. The corporate scandals of the 1990s shook people's confidence in business leadership. Reports of sexual harassment at the military academies undermined confidence in leadership in the armed services. And the incidents of abuse in the Catholic Church disillusioned many people with its leadership. Leaders cannot lose trust and continue to influence others. Trust is the foundation of leadership. That's the law of solid ground. It wasn't the decisions, it was the leadership. I personally learned the power of the law of solid ground when I was the senior pastor of Skyline Church in the San Diego area. In the fall of 1989, we had several new programs starting at the church. Preparations for our exhausting Christmas show season were in full swing, and I was traveling quite a bit as a speaker. It was very hectic. Because I was so busy, I let my choleric nature get the best of me and made a big mistake. I very quickly made 3 major decisions and implemented them. I changed some components of the Christmas show. I permanently discontinued our Sunday evening service, and I fired a staff member. What's interesting is that none of my 3 decisions was wrong. The change of the Christmas program was beneficial. The Sunday evening service, though enjoyed by a few of the older members of the congregation, wasn't serving a need that wasn't already being met better elsewhere. And the staff member I fired had to go, and it was important that I not delay in dismissing him. My mistake was the way I made those 3 decisions. In an organization made up of many volunteers, decisions need to be processed correctly. Because everything in the church was going so well, I thought I could take a shortcut. I was wrong. Ordinarily, I would gather my leaders, cast vision for them, answer questions, and guide them through the issues. Then, I would give them time to exert their influence with the next level of leaders in the church. And finally, once the timing was right, I would make a general announcement to everyone, giving plenty of reassurance and encouraging people to be a part of the new vision. But I didn't do any of those things, and I should have known better. The result was mistrust. It wasn't long before I began to sense unrest among the people and to hear rumblings. At first, my attitude was that everyone should get over it and move on. But then I realized that the problem wasn't them. It was me. I had been too impatient. On top of that, my attitude wasn't very positive. Not good when you're the guy who writes books on attitude. That's when I realized that I had broken the law of solid ground. For the first time in my career, my people were questioning me. Our relationship of trust was beginning to erode. As soon as I realized I was wrong, I publicly apologized to my people and asked for their forgiveness. Your people know when you make mistakes. The real question is whether you're going to fess up. If you do, you can often regain their trust. Fortunately, that's what happened with me. From then on, I was more careful to correctly process decisions. I learned firsthand that when it comes to leadership, you just can't take shortcuts, no matter how long you've been leading your people. Trust is like change in leaders' pockets. Each time you make a good leadership decision, you earn more change. Each time you make poor decisions, you pay out some of your change to the people. All leaders have a certain amount of change in their pocket when they start a new leadership position. Whatever they do either builds up their change or depletes it. If leaders make one bad decision after another, they keep paying out change. Then one day, after making one last bad decision, they suddenly and irreparably run out of change. It doesn't even matter if the last blunder was big or small. At that point, it's too late. When you're out of change, you're out as a leader. In contrast, leaders who keep making good decisions and keep recording wins for the organization build up change. Then even if they make a huge blunder, they still have plenty of change left over. That's the kind of history I had at Skyline. For 8 years, I had made good decisions and earned the people's trust. That is why I was able to regain their trust very quickly. Trust is the foundation of leadership. Trust is the foundation of leadership. How does a leader build trust? By consistently exemplifying competence, connection, and character. People will forgive occasional mistakes based on ability, especially if they can see that you're still growing as a leader. And they will give you some time to connect. But they won't trust someone who has slips in character. In that area, even occasional lapses are lethal. All effective leaders know this truth. Craig Weatherup, who retired as founding chairman and CEO of the Pepsi Bottling Group, acknowledges, people will tolerate honest mistakes, but if you violate their trust, you will find it very difficult to ever gain their confidence. That is one reason that you need to trust. Restart. People will tolerate honest mistakes, but if you violate their trust, you will find it very difficult to ever regain their confidence. That is one reason that you need to treat trust as your most precious asset. You may fool your boss, but you can never fool your colleagues or subordinates. General H. Norman Tropoff, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf points to the significance of character. Leadership is a potent combination of strategy and character, but if you must be without one, be without strategy. Character and leadership credibility always go hand in hand. Anthony Harrigan, president of the U.S. Business and Industrial Council, said, "The role of character always has been the key factor in the rise and fall of nations, and one can be sure that America is no exception to this rule of history. We won't survive as a country because we are smarter or more sophisticated, but because we are, we hope, stronger inwardly." In short, character is the only effective bulwark against internal and external forces that lead to a country's disintegration or collapse. Character makes trust possible, and trust makes leadership possible. That is the law of solid ground. Character communicates. Whenever you lead people, it's as if they consent to take a journey with you. The way that trip is going to turn out is predicted by your character. With good character, the longer the trip is, the better it seems. But if your character is flawed, the longer the trip is, the worse it gets. Why? Because no one enjoys spending time with someone he doesn't trust. A person's character quickly communicates many things to others. Here are the most important ones. Character communicates consistency. Leaders without inner strength can't be counted on day after day because their ability to perform changes consistently. NBA great Jerry West commented, "You can't get too much done in your life if you only work on the days when you get fit." I'm going to restart all of that. Leaders without inner strength can't be counted on day after day because their ability to perform changes constantly. NBA great Jerry West commented, "You can't get too much done in your life if you only work on the days when you feel good." If your people don't know what to expect from you as a leader, at some point, they won't look to you for leadership. When I think of leaders who When I look of leaders, when I think of leaders who epitomize consistency of character, the first person who comes to mind is Billy Graham. Regardless of personal religious beliefs, everybody trusts him. Why? Because he has modeled high character for more than half a century. He lives out his values every day. He never makes a commitment unless he is going to keep it, and he goes out of his way to personify integrity. Character communicates potential. British politician and writer John Morley observed, "No man can climb out beyond the limitations of his own character. Weak character is limiting." Who do you think has the greatest potential to achieve great dreams and have a positive impact on others? Someone who is honest, disciplined, and hardworking, or someone who is deceitful, impulsive, and lazy? Or someone who is deceitful, impulsive, and lazy? It sounds obvious when it's phrased that way, doesn't it? Talent alone is never enough. It must be bolstered. Talent alone is never enough. It must be bolstered by character if a person desires to go far. Think about someone like the NFL's Terrell Owens. Few football players have his talent, yet he seems unable to get along with his teammates, wherever he plays. If he keeps going on the same track, he will never fulfill his potential as a player. Poor character is like a time bomb ticking away. It's only a matter of time before it blows up a person's ability to perform and the capacity to lead. Why? Because people with weak character are not trustworthy, and trust is the foundation of leadership. Craig Weatherup explains, "You don't build trust by talking about it. You build it by achieving results, always with integrity and in a manner that shows real personal regard for the people with whom you work." When a leader's character is strong, people trust him, and they trust in his ability to release their potential. That not only gives his followers hope for the future, but it also promotes a strong belief in themselves and their organization. Character communicates respect. When you don't have character within, you can't earn respect without. And respect is absolutely essential for lasting leadership. How do leaders earn respect? By making sound decisions, by admitting their mistakes, and by putting what's best for their followers and the organization ahead of their personal agendas. Years ago, a movie was made about the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment and its colonel. Years ago, a movie was made about the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment and its colonel. Years ago, a movie was made about the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment and its colonel, Robert Gould Shaw. The film was called Glory, and though some of its plots was fictionalized, the Civil War story of Shaw's journey with his men and the respect he earned from them was real. The movie recounted the formation of this unit in the Union Army, which was the first to be composed of African American soldiers. Shaw, a white officer, took command of the regiment, oversaw recruiting, selected the white officers, equipped men, and trained them as soldiers. He drove them hard, knowing that their performance in battle would either vindicate or condemn the value of black people as soldiers and citizens in the minds of many white Northerners. In the process, the soldiers and Shaw earned one another's respect. A few months after their training was complete, the men of the 54th got the opportunity to prove themselves in the Union assault on Confederate Fort Wagner in South Carolina. Shaw's, Shaw's biographer, Russell Duncan, said of the attack, with the final admonition to prove yourselves men, Shaw positioned himself in front of and ordered. With the final admonition to prove yourselves men, Shaw positioned himself in front and ordered, "Forward." Years later, one soldier remembered that the regiment fought hard because Shaw was in front, not behind. Almost half of the 600 men from the 54th who fought that day were wounded, captured, or killed. Though they fought valiantly, they were unable to take Fort Wagner, and Shaw, who had courageously led his men to the top of the fort's Shaw, who had courageously led his men to the top of the fort's parapet in the first assault, was killed alongside his men. Shaw's actions on the final day solidified the respect his men already had for him. 2 weeks after the battle, Albinus Fisher, a sergeant in the 54th, said, "I still feel more eager for the struggle than I ever yet have, for I now wish to have revenge for our gallant colonel." J.R. Miller once observed, "The only thing that walks back from the tomb with the mourners and refuses to be buried is the character of a man." This is true. What a man is survives him. It can never be buried. Shaw's character, strong to the last, had communicated a level of respect to his men that lived beyond him. A leader's good character builds trust among his followers. A leader's good character builds trust among his followers. But when a leader breaks trust, he forfeits his ability to lead. That's the law of solid ground, the beginning of the end of trust. Earlier, I mentioned Watergate and the various public scandals that have undermined the public's confidence in leaders during the last 30 years. But the event that I believe began to erode the public's faith in the nation's leaders and develop strong skepticism But the event that I believe began to erode the public's faith in the nation's leaders and developed strong skepticism in the country was the war in Vietnam. The actions taken by members of the Johnson administration, the mistakes made by Robert McNamara, and their unwillingness to face and admit those mistakes broke trust with the American people. They violated the law of solid ground, and the United States has been suffering from the repercussions ever since. Vietnam was already at war with President Kennedy, and Robert McNamara, his Secretary of Defense, Vietnam was already at war with President Kennedy, and Robert McNamara, his Secretary of Defense, took office in January of 1961. The Vietnam region had been a battleground for decades, and the United States got involved in the mid-1950s when President Eisenhower sent a small number of U.S. troops to Vietnam as advisors. When Kennedy took office, he continued Eisenhower's policy. It was always his intention to let the South Vietnamese fight and win their own war. But over time, the United States became increasingly involved. Before the war was over, more than 500,000 American troops at one time served in Vietnam. If you experienced those war years, you may be surprised to know that in the beginning, American support for the war was very strong, even as the number of troops began being sent overseas rapidly increased, and the casualties mounted. By 1966, more than 200,000 Americans had been sent to Vietnam, yet two-thirds of all Americans surveyed by Lewis Harris believed that Vietnam was the place where the United States should stand and fight communism. And most people expressed the belief that the United States should stay until the fight was finished. First trust, then support. But support eventually eroded. The Vietnam War was being handled very badly. On top of that, our leaders continued the war even after they realized that we couldn't win it. But the worst mistake of all was that McNamara and President Johnson weren't honest with the American people about it. And because trust is the foundation of leadership, it ultimately destroyed the administration's leadership. In the book, in his book, In Retrospect, McNamara recounts that he repeatedly minimized American losses and told only half-truths about the war. For example, he says, "Upon my return to Washington from Saigon on December 21st, 1963, I was less than candid when I reported to the press. I said, we observed the results of a very substantial increase in Viet Cong activity. True. But I then added, we reviewed the plans of the South Vietnamese and we have very reason to believe they will be successful. An overstatement at best." For a while, nobody questioned McNamara's statements because there was no reason to mistrust the country's leaders. But in time, people recognized that his words and facts weren't matching up. And that's when the American public began to lose faith. Years later, McNamara admitted his failure. We of the Kennedy and Johnson administrations who participated in the decisions on Vietnam acted according to what we thought were the principles and traditions of this nation. We made our decisions in light of those values. Yet we were wrong, terribly wrong. By then, it was too late. Many would argue that McNamara's admission came 30 years and 58,000 lives too late. The cost of Vietnam was high, and not just in human lives. As the American people's trust in their leaders deteriorated, so did their willingness to follow them. Protests led to open rebellion and to society-wide turmoil. The era that had begun with the hope and idealism characterized by John F. Kennedy ultimately ended with the mistrust and cynicism associated with Richard Nixon. Whenever a leader breaks the law of solid ground, he pays a price in his leadership. McNamara and President Johnson lost the trust of the American people, and their ability to lead suffered as a result. Eventually, McNamara resigned as Secretary of Defense. Johnson, the consummate politician, recognized his weakened position, and he didn't run for re-election. But the repercussions of broken trust didn't end there. The American people's distrust for politicians has continued to this day. No leader can break trust with his people and expect to keep influencing them. Trust is the foundation of leadership. Violate the law of solid ground, and you diminish your influence as a leader.